and he's going to house it.
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football, sports betting, and NASCAR home. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. Follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me to break down some of the latest news and some of actionable, advice as we head into basically the biggest draft weekend of the fantasy football calendar is Brian Twining. What's up, Brian?
What's up, Kyle? Yeah, there's been a lot of stuff happening over these last few days alone. I mean, the first couple of weeks of the preseason, we saw some injury news with the Saints, and now we got more big news out of New Orleans. We saw the Rams dealing with an injury at running back, and now there's another cog in the machine to worry about there. So, yeah, I'm excited to dive into these topics today.
Yeah, we got four big topics to jump into. We'll talk some Jags, we'll talk some Rams, we'll talk some Broncos, and we'll talk some Saints. Try and get people as much information heading into that big draft weekend, and kind of what our thoughts are on how to approach all of these situations. I am going to pull up Fantasy Football Calculator. I want to get your opinion on this, and I know we've talked about it before, but ADP is so, I feel like it's gone. It's the more as time over the past couple of years. If depending on where you look, how the scoring is, what site you're drafting on, ADP swings pretty wildly, and how much of a factor like recency bias plays, and or if it's stuff that's been going on since November, that kind of stuff. But it's really important that you kind of understand the room you're drafting in and understand the site you're drafting on.
Yes.
When it comes to ADP, because I'm looking at Fantasy Football Calculator, and Tyreek Hill is 111, and I've been drafting on Underdog pretty much all offseason. He's usually somewhere between pick 5 and pick 8. For him to fall to the end of round 1 is pretty rare. So once again, knowing what you're doing. But Brian, are you kind of checking out different ADP at different sites, knowing when you're doing your home leagues and drafting with other people?
So normally when I do my home league drafts, I tend not to look too much into the ADP data, because when you're drafting with your buddies or with family members, a lot of people in those drafts, I mean, everyone knows these fellow drafters who they know absolutely nothing about football. They do zero research.
They show up with the magazine from June.
Exactly.
And expect it to be relevant, and that's when they
exactly. And I actually play in a home league where the majority of people draft based off of positional need. So they're looking at a sheet.
Gotta get your kicker. Gotta fill out that starting rotation.
Exactly. So they're looking at it just by position, and which completely throws off any ADP data. So for me, it's more so if I'm playing in any money leagues or professional leagues, I'm definitely looking into the ADP stuff, and it just helps me get a good idea of where these guys are going in terms of what their value is. So it allows me the chance to kind of determine, do I want to reach for this guy, or should I be waiting? So it definitely plays a factor, but it's not something that I go, 100% off of when I'm drafting.
100%. And don't tie yourself to ADP. Don't feel like, his ADP says that you should go, 5 picks later, but if he's your favorite player left on the board, go and grab him, because people are going to make wild claims. They're going to draft things you don't expect. Receivers might go faster. Running backs might go faster. You got to be ready to be patient and be flexible and draft the players that make the most sense and that are going to benefit your team. So let's jump into it. We got 4 things to jump into, and we'll start with James Robinson, who was the wonder boy last year that absolutely dominated the fantasy football landscape and became a guy that went from being undrafted to basically a league winning upside at running back, top 10, top 12 type guy. I think he was 5th or 6th in rushing yards. But they drafted Travis Etienne. Everything was pointing towards, Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne, this offense evolving a little bit. Now Etienne's out. He's going to miss basically the whole season. It seems like there's no chance they play him this year, which, I mean, for running back especially, that does make a lot of sense. Now Robinson is in theory the guy. Last year we saw a lot of everything falling to Robinson's shoulders. This year we have Trevor Lawrence involved. We have Marvin Jones and DJ Chark and Laviska Shenault. The passing game should be a lot more impactful. I guess, what are you doing with Robinson? Are you pushing him up because of the potential expected workload? Or do you think kind of things don't well, I guess where are you at? What are you doing with him? As we head into drafts this weekend, is he somebody that you might be targeting?
The injury to Travis Etienne, I think it definitely boosts James Robinson's value. It's not so much to the point where I'm like enamored with him in terms of like the fantasy outlook, because this team is going to be garbage this season. But, I think it's definitely within reason that he could produce very similar kinds of numbers if he's seeing anywhere near the volume that he was last year. Now, mind you, Carlos Hyde is in Jacksonville, who's familiar with Urban Meyer. So I do think that he's going to be seeing some of those touches that James Robinson was seeing last year, who was literally playing like 97% of the team's offensive snaps. I think that's definitely going to go down. But, being a guy who's going to take the majority of the carries, I mean, we're probably looking at like an 80-20 split in terms of carries. And this offense should operate at a faster pace. I think it should be a little bit better this year. I think it's within, the realm of outcomes that he's finishing top 20, top 15 in the position, especially being the guy all season there.
Yeah. So the one thing I've heard is Urban is fine with Darrell Bevell kind of running the show, but does want him to play faster, which, if you're a fantasy owner, is music to your ears. Right now, James Robinson over the last 2 days per Fantasy Football Calculator is going basically at the beginning of the 4th round, going after DeAndre Swift, Josh Jacobs, before Darrell Henderson, Miles Sanders. I'm not sure I could get there at that price.
That's a little steep.
Yeah, the next running backs would be Mike Davis, Myles Gaskin. At that point, I would be more interested in Robinson. But then I'm looking at the 5th round, and you're looking at Kareem Hunt, you're looking at Javonte Williams, you're looking at my boy Chase Edmonds. I think there's a potential for him to be really useful, but as you mentioned, Carlos Hyde, if he cuts into even a little bit of those carries, now we're talking a chunk. Now we're also saying, we've seen Urban use guys like Curtis Samuel in the past as kind of flexible options that aren't necessarily running backs, that are pass catchers, but and the Laviska Shenault hype had been dwindled a little bit because of the Etienne addition. Now maybe Etienne, maybe with Etienne out, Laviska steps into some more of that, short passing game, quick screens, line him up in a variety of spots. And once again, Robinson can be involved in the passing game, but with the bevy of options they have, I feel like even if he is, it's going to be at a much reduced role from last year. All of this is kind of capping his potential upside. And just for me, like at almost at no point, like, am I comfortable? Like, I would probably honestly start considering him in kind of the 6th round around Damian Harris, Raheem Mostert, Trey Sermon, Michael Carter. And I still think I'd take most of those guys over him.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that pessimistic about him. I mean, let me
ask you. Okay, let me throw in a few names at you. So you're on the clock. It's the 4th round. DeAndre Swift or James Robinson?
Well, let's just get this out there. I will probably more than likely not be taking a running back in the 4th round. I lean wide receivers, but in that case,
that's also part of my reasoning, and that's why I'm more comfortable waiting till the 5th or 6th to go after. Okay, but let's say
I'm definitely going DeAndre
backs
Swift.
Are falling. You're comfortable. You're ready to take a running back.
I'm going Swift for sure over
Josh Jacobs
Robinson
or James Robinson.
Honestly, I'm going with the guy in the better offense, and in terms of who's going to be seeing more of the percentage of the offensive plays, and that's got to be Jacobs for me.
Interesting. Yeah. The Kenyon Drake thing is really confusing to me. I've gone back.
I don't know what to do with that situation. There are so many running back conundrums this year.
You just really have to buy into the guys. I mean, Gruden loves to run the ball, so that could make sense. Miles Sanders or James Robinson?
I will not walk 5,000 or whatever the hell that song, 500 miles with Sanders anymore. So for me, I'd be going James Robinson.
Hate is baffling to me. Like, I know it's frustrating, and I know that the Eagles run a multitude of offense options, and they brought in Kenneth Gainwell, they brought in Kerryon Johnson, but like
I will say, I think the reasoning for me with Miles Sanders, it really has less to do with the other guys in that running back room, and it has more to do with the fact that Jalen Hurts will be taking a lot of the ground. I mean, not a lot, but he will be taking a percentage of the ground game, which could affect Sanders' output.
100%. That's why people are pessimistic on Philly, on Buffalo, on a few of those situations where the quarterback's getting 5 or 6 rushing touchdowns and a little more involved in the running game. Even Baltimore. But like, I don't really see a ton of difference between J.K. Dobbins and Miles Sanders. And J.K. Dobbins is beginning of the third. Miles Sanders is beginning of the fourth. Like, it's a round difference. I'll take the discount all day long.
Without getting too off topic, I think the reasoning behind that is the fact that Baltimore has been the league's rush heaviest offense each season under Lamar Jackson, and I don't see that changing. And even with Lamar taking, 30% of the carries away from those running backs, I think this is an MVP season for Jackson. So I think that this offense is really going to be churning, which leads me to believe that both of those guys in the backfield, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, could approach 7 to 8 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Which give both of them value, not necessarily third round value, but in that case, I'd actually prefer James Robinson over a guy like J.K. Dobbins just because of the fact that he is the 1A.
Yeah.
To a very lesser 1B in an offense, whereas Dobbins is going to have competition from Edwards and Lamar.
Yeah, I mean, we could be looking at a 40% usage for Dobbins, and that's nothing you want. I mean, at least with Robinson, even if the offense isn't quite as effective and he's not quite as talented, if he's seeing 75, 80% of the running touches and getting a smattering of pass catchers, I mean, he could definitely outproduce a lot of those guys. It sounds like I won't be getting him. You might have a few shares come the weekend's end, but if people get aggressive, because it is funny, because I feel like if Etienne didn't get drafted and we had this kind of hype and it was just the James Robinson show, he would be going in kind of that second round range, maybe after Taylor, but like the Antonio Gibson, Joe Mixon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, J.K. Dobbins range. Like, if Etienne just didn't happen, I feel like that's where he would be going. So if you like him, you believe in him, you think he can be the real deal, you're actually getting a little bit of a discount on him. But I will be curious after this big draft weekend to see kind of if his ADP gets pushed up because of all those factors.
Yeah, it'll be really curious to see, and maybe they go out and they make another addition too, because I mean, Carlos Hyde is on his last legs.
Yeah, I mean, Carlos Hyde's there. They could go after a Peterson or a Gurley. They could. There could be some guys that are kind of on the fringe with other teams. Steelers guys might be making some cuts. I know there's a few teams, so it will be interesting to see if some of these teams make moves. Speaking of making moves, let's head out to the West Coast and talk about the Rams. Cam Akers goes down, Darrell Henderson time, but then they bring in Sony Michel, a running back who, coming out of Georgia, had all the upside in the world, first round talent, has flashed at times, but has also had a lot of injuries and has been kind of stuck in the mud, as some of people say. So I'm trying to figure out how valid this is. I did come away with Sony Michel late in my draft on Saturday in my big home league, thinking maybe he could win in New England. As we mentioned, we lean wide receiver heavy, was going for scraps at the running back position. Initially was kind of excited about this. Henderson was a guy that I was really excited about. McVay came out and said basically it doesn't change the outlook for what Henderson was going to be. The Rams did give up a couple draft picks to make this deal happen. I guess, like, when you hear McVay say that, do you assume that Henderson was always going to be the guy, and they were going to bring in somebody? They had to have, between Xavier Jones and Jake Funk, like, that wasn't going to be their backup going.
They were not going to be getting funky with Jake.
Right. But do you think that means the plan was always to bring in somebody else and kind of give them 20% of the workload? Or do you think that means Henderson's the guy, all systems go, and Michel is purely a backup that's going to be there in case things get off the rails?
Dude, quite honestly, I am like staying away from this situation this weekend in particular in one of my home league drafts, just because you hear McVay speak, this does not change the situation. Now, I mean, we've seen it multiple times before. Coach speak, you can't really trust it. And is this an indication that he's referring to what the plan was for Henderson prior to Cam Akers' injury in terms of the percentage of touches that was going to be split between the guys? Or is this them acknowledging Darrell Henderson's going to be the guy? He's going to see 60 to 70% of the carries, and Sony Michel is just going to be sprinkled in there. I don't really know where to go with this, considering this same Rams team was running 3 guys out there on a weekly basis last year. And I don't see them really wanting to just feed one guy, especially with a running back room that is super short now without Akers and just, 2 really young guys behind Michel and Henderson. I think this is going to be one of those rotational things where it's a hot hand approach every week to a certain degree. So I want to see kind of the ADP, the way it adjusts over the next week or so. And then also as we get closer to the season, how integrated Sony Michel is into this offense before I'm like jumping in Darrell Henderson. I know this, I'm totally backtracking on my statement about Henderson, but yeah, I'm a little worried about them going out and, getting a guy like Michel to take some touches.
Yeah, I mean, it is legitimately concerning. That being said, I would take Darrell Henderson over James Robinson 100 times out of 100.
It's so much better offense.
I believe in the offense. I believe in the player. I believe McVay is happy to use one guy if he can find a guy that he likes and will trust. We've seen it with Gurley. I think part of what happened was, they kind of used Henderson, didn't really like what he was doing, kind of got a little banged up. Then they brought in Akers and used him a bunch. There is some concern because they had Henderson, they gave him a workload, and then they decided to use heavy draft capital on Akers. And as we've talked about before, Brian, it doesn't matter what we think, it matters what the coach thinks about the player. And if the coach doesn't think the player has it, they will move on, and we just have to suck it up and deal with it.
Yeah, I almost feel like on that note, I feel like this situation is like perfectly reminiscent of that Spider-Man image of the 2 Spider-Mans pointing at each other, because although Henderson hasn't changed teams, both of these guys are in a very similar situation. New England went out, spent pretty high draft capital on Sony Michel, and then went out and drafted Damian Harris because they didn't really think that he was going to be the guy. They're like the same exact player in terms of what their career path has taken. And I think it's going to be a competition early on to see who's going to be the hot hand, who's going to see the majority of the touches, who's going to be the goal line guy. It definitely scared me away. To me right now, this is New England West at the moment.
Yeah. And what have we done with New England? What have we done with San Francisco? We take the cheaper option.
I would much rather take Michel rule.
So if you're sitting in double-digit rounds, you've gone receiver heavy, maybe you have a tight end, you need a running back. You have Sony Michel, you have Carlos Hyde, you have whatever running back in New England not named Damian Harris. Who are you taking? Who do you believe in the most out of that kind of combination?
Oh man, well, I would probably. I mean, this is kind of surprising for that late in the draft. I'm not looking for steady performances. I'm looking for somebody who could boom and who could give me the best performances. To me, it's got to be Ramondre Stevenson, because I so wish I would have tweeted this out weeks ago. He looks exactly like LeGarrette Blount. And just today, there's talk about him speaking with Blount about, developing more of a powerful running style, what made him so successful in New England. And if he's anything like Blount in New England, even with Cam Newton there, you're looking at a guy with 10 touchdown potential, even with Damian Harris taking the ball 20 to 20. I would much rather have that than Michel, who may be seeing half the touches in LA. There's just so much uncertainty, and we've seen what he can do. He's not going to be that 150 a game guy, especially on a team with Matthew Stafford playing quarterback.
So I think there's a path to Sony being the feature back and getting 80% of the work. I think that is a very within his realm of outcomes. Is it likely? Probably not, but is it possible? 100%. I think the same thing with Stevenson. As you mentioned with Carlos Hyde, that's not in the range of outcomes. No. Even if Carlos Hyde is the guy, he's seeing 80. He's seeing what Robinson's seeing: 80% of the work, 70% of the work. Not really in the passing game. Kind of. So he would be the number 3. I like Ramondre Stevenson a lot. That being said, Sony Michel's probably the answer. But if you're happy with your running back room and you're shooting for the moon, you're looking for a guy who can just take over the role, and you like what Henderson could possibly be, I think Ramondre is a fun name to target, and he's a super, super interesting value later in drafts. Let's head to Denver, where Teddy Bridgewater has been named the starter. Brian, we've talked about this a little bit. Kind of expectations for what we should do. The good news coming out of Denver also is it sounds like Cortland Sutton's going to be good to go on whenever their next preseason game is this weekend. Everything's pointing to him kind of being ready for week 1, which is kind of a bit of a newsy item. The Noah Fant news isn't great with him kind of potentially missing week 1, but we'll see. I'm not super worried, but obviously, unless this is super deep league, Teddy's probably not getting drafted. But for you, in terms of what your expectations are for this Broncos offense, now that Teddy is the guy, what pieces do you want? What interests you from Denver?
Well, I feel like I'm just riding along the bandwagon here, and I really think that this is a huge boon to Jerry Jeudy's success because, I mean, we saw all the statistics, a few months back about how he had the least amount of catchable targets in the NFL last year with Drew Lock behind center, and he still almost got to 1,000 receiving yards. This guy is just an absolute stud at the wide receiver position. Teddy Bridgewater was completing like close to 70% of his passes last year in Carolina. 3 guys in Carolina almost had over 1,000 receiving yards. They had 3 guys with over 100, almost 100 targets. I think Jeudy is like to the moon right now. Yeah. Sutton, I'm slightly worried about just because he's like the Kenny Galladay style receiver where he needs the guy to just chuck it up, and Teddy Two Gloves doesn't seem like that gunslinger to do that. So he
did have some success with Robbie Anderson last year. And if they can run some similar plays, I know Anderson saw a little bit more like slant and take off for the touchdown. I do wonder if we are sleeping on Sutton just a little bit because 2 years ago, this guy was absolutely incredible. But I'm with you, a year, basically he's been dealing with injuries. He's still sort of dealing with injuries.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Cortland Sutton for me is like that Allen Robinson type receiver where we probably discredit his route running a little bit, but it's in those one-on-one opportunities where he really shines. And it, like, without a quarterback who does that, it's really hard for them to put up the numbers.
Yeah. And Jerry Jeudy is absolutely somebody I'm excited about. I loved him as a player coming out of Bama. Very excited. I wish he had gone to a better system in terms of Denver, but this could be interesting. We saw last year in Carolina, even with Teddy having issues getting throwing passing touchdowns, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and Curtis Samuel all top 25 options. I think Jerry Jeudy could easily outperform his ADP. He is going an interesting range. He's going right after Chase Claypool and T. Higgins, right before Michael Thomas, Odell Beckham, Antonio Brown, Jamar Chase. So it is an interesting range. There is a lot of potential, and I think clusters like that are going to be the key to figuring out who wins fantasy football this year. I like Jerry Jeudy a lot. But I'm not. I definitely won't be taking him over T. Higgins, over DJ Moore, over Chase Claypool. And when I'm talking about names like Odell, I would take over him. Jamar Chase, I'd probably take over him, although it's close. I would take Jeudy over Thomas and over Antonio Brown. What say you?
Early on in the season, early, when we first started talking fantasy, like Jeudy was kind of an afterthought for me. But after like diving deeper into it, seeing what he actually did on the field, I mean, the dude had almost 900 receiving yards on 52 receptions.
Yeah. He's insanely talented, and he's a second-year receiver, which tend to have a lot of success.
And I feel like they had probably the worst quarterback play in terms of consistency.
They had Kendall Hinton playing quarterback at one point last year. Like, even if he just gets like average quarterback play, as long as it's consistent, getting the balls in position where he could catch the ball, like this could be a guy that, we're all excited about, like what Brandon Ayuk could be. Judy could smash him in terms of production. Tyler Lockett, I like a lot, but those could be inconsistent weeks where Judy could be a lot more reliable. It probably depends a little bit too on kind of how you draft, right? If you take Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp, maybe Jerry Judy isn't quite as exciting. But if you take guys that have big spike weeks, but that could underwhelm a little bit, maybe he's somebody that becomes a little more interesting.
I will just say, if Jerry Judy approaches even Robbie Anderson type targets, Jerry Judy is going to blow away the numbers that Robbie Anderson put up, because no offense to Robbie Anderson, he's not the athlete. He's not at the skill level of Jerry Judy. I just think that, over those guys right there, I would take Jerry Judy over DJ Moore, over Chase Claypool. Probably, it's really hard with that Cincinnati situation. I'm not taking Jamar Chase over Jerry Judy. There's just too many mouths to feed there. Definitely over Michael Thomas. I'm still really high on Odell, so I would probably lean with the history of Odell over Judy. But
See, the Odell situation is just like, this is a team that showed they're going to pass more. A guy that we've seen go for 1,400 yards and double-digit touchdowns.
I worry about his relationship with Baker still, but he's just so talented.
If it's close at all, when you can go, I know you hate him, but Baker versus Bridgewater, like, it's not even a debate.
Well, and it's just the overall success of the offense too, like how many opportunities they're going to be seeing. Because another worry about this whole Denver situation is the fact that this team is built on their defense. It's Vic Fangio. He's a defensive-minded coach. They're going to want to keep these games in the high teens, low 20s. They're not trying to go out here and try to boat race people in the 30s, because if that's happening, they're probably not able to compete. So.
And Sutton's there, and Fant's there, and the running backs. There is a lot of mouths to feed in an offense that we don't expect to be quite as high octane as Cincinnati, as Cleveland, as some of these other situations. So there is reason to have pessimism, but
yes,
I appreciate the spicy, bold takes of one Brian Twining.
It is super interesting though when you take a look at these situations, because if, say, Jerry Judy was in CeeDee Lamb's position last year and he was on the Cowboys, we'd be talking about Jerry Judy right now as a top 10 receiving option going into this season.
He'd be in that like early third round range with Keenan Allen,
exactly,
and Allen Robinson.
That's the thing, is like the talent level is wide receiver 1 worthy, but it's just, what are we going to see out of this offense and Teddy Bridgewater? And if you can get him at that price that he's currently being drafted as in the 6th round, you have the opportunity to get yourself a wide receiver 1 super late. So that's kind of why he has that upside to put up that 1,400 yard season.
100%. Let's head down to New Orleans and talk about Jameis Winston being named the starter. Brian, we talked about this a little bit. I assumed that when the Michael Thomas injury happened, that McVay would go a little more run heavy. I've been drafting.
You mean Sean Payton?
Him too. I've been drafting best ball teams with a lot of Latavius Murray, who is apparently now going to get cut, and Taysom Hill, and I'm not feeling super great about those combinations. Luckily.
Thank the Lord it's not
luckily
Taysom Hill for Kamara.
Taysom was basically a last round pick, so it's not going to kill me too much, and he was always my quarterback 3 in those builds. But I guess Jameis, are they just seeing, like, obviously I like the talent. I think he can be a really good quarterback. I think he has a lot of potential. Sure, he makes some dumb mistakes, but if he can clean that up a little bit, he can be a really valuable option. I guess they either feel good about potentially Michael Thomas coming back. I know Troutman's banged up a little bit. Marquez Callaway has been an admiration and is flying up draft boards. They have a few other pieces, but is this just a reaction to seeing what like Tampa and Carolina can do offensively, knowing they have to keep up? Or do you think there's more to this where Jameis could potentially just kind of carry this offense when it's less about who's catching the passes and more about him being just the better option?
That's a really interesting question because this offense has always been predicated on ball control and the ability to maintain drives and put the ball into the end zone.
Yep.
And that's not something that we've consistently seen out of Jameis Winston. So
no,
I mean, I'm excited for the potential of the big plays, but the fact that they have nobody on the outside, I mean, everyone's all excited about Marquez Callaway, but this is preseason, folks. Like, teams are running like the most basic schemes on defense, on offense. Like, I mean, if you're just putting a guy on an island, yeah, more than likely he's going to get beat on the outside. But I'm really curious to see how these pass catchers do, especially early on in the season, if Jameis Winston's back there. And I mean, I think this is going to be a Alvin Kamara offense once again, maybe even like heavier than we've seen before, because there is literally nobody on the outside catching passes. I don't really care that Callaway looks good and it's Sean Payton, but I mean, who the hell is he throwing to? He's throwing to a converted wide receiver at tight end, Juwan Johnson, who's taking over for Troutman, who got hurt already. Marquez Callaway is the number one guy. I mean, they have Deontay Harris, 5'6" Deontay Harris. I mean, are you really trusting that those guys are going to be able to produce for Winston? I mean, it's hard for me to get behind this offense at all.
So do you consider drafting Kamara? Like, because right now Kamara was like the clear, like, fourth or fifth option. It was either him or Zeke. We're basically one of the 104, 105 in almost every draft I've been in. Is there a world where you draft Kamara over Dalvin Cook? Is there a world where you draft Kamara over Christian McCaffrey?
I don't think Kamara goes that high just because, like, I mean, you know what? That's a now that I'm sitting here,
say full PPR. Like, is there a world where you take him as the 102 and he's catching 100 passes and maybe he's on pace for 1,000 season or something close to that? And
I think that's definitely within possible. I think there's a better chance of that happening than him not doing something of that nature, because we've seen it this preseason. The rumblings are that the Tony Jones is the favorite to be the second running back. Like, they're gonna dump Latavius Murray all of a sudden, and if they do that, that to me is an indication that they're ready to give Alvin Kamara, the lion's share of the carries, and he's going to see upwards of 15 to 20 carries now on top of his receiving game work. And if that were to happen, he's a guy who could compete with McCaffrey in terms of the 101. And
like, I love Christian McCaffrey and he's incredible and everything, but like the auto assumption that Christian McCaffrey is the 101 and everybody else is just in line behind him, I think is a little aggressive. I
don't know, man. It's kind of one of those things you continue to ride the wave until it absolutely crashes. And
last year was ugly. But
even in the games he played, though, last year, he still saw like 75% of the team's offense.
And with Joe Brady, he could be sick. Like,
exactly. You're looking at in McCaffrey. You're looking at a guy who's probably going to run for over 1,200 yards and probably have 1,000 receiving yards. I mean, and those are the floors for him.
Ryan, it's too easy. It can't. Football's never this easy.
That's what we tell ourselves, but oftentimes that's like I
like to be a little different. I like to think outside the box, but sometimes.
Kamara,
I get a little too cute for my own good, and just take the best player. Don't overthink it, and go from there.
I said this the other day on responding to somebody on Twitter. Sometimes it's paralysis by analysis, and sometimes you just have to put away the data and just go on your instinct. And the instinct is McCaffrey's going to kick ass. And the same thing with Kamara. I had Kamara number 2 last year, and I don't see any reason why he's going to see a decline in passing game work. I think he's only going to increase, especially with Michael Thomas out and the likelihood of them utilizing that top 5 offensive line even more with Winston to avoid mistakes. I think sees him, approaching the teens in terms of carries as opposed to like the 12, 13 he was seeing. So for me, Kamara, I think is kind of on the same level as Dalvin Cook now. Jumps
and
Zeke.
I wouldn't fault anybody who drafts those two. Whether you go second or third, even Derrick Henry can get in there. I know he doesn't catch passes, but his safety and upside at is if you're going to draft a running back early, he makes all too much sense. And then of course this is the year that everyone's off and I buy in, and this is when the wheels fall off, and then I'm going to be stuck with egg on my face anyway. So make sure you follow us on Twitter if you're not already doing so. Make sure you smash that thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the pod. Let us know what are you doing with these players? What are you doing with the Saints? What are you doing with the Broncos? Let us know down in the comments. As you head into drafts this weekend, hit us up on Twitter if you have questions, if you want some help, if you need a little more assurance on maybe a pick or a play or whatever it may be. That's Brian Twining. I'm Kyle Robert. Good luck with your drafts, and we'll talk to you guys next week.